Thank you for being here, and congratulations.
Thank you, Errol. Great to be here.
We've just heard that there doesn't seem to be much deal making from this guy who says that he's a deal maker, the president. But first, let's talk about some of the practical side of all of this. You've got a lot of federal workers. You've got federal facilities. Gateway, I believe, recreational areas in your district.
That's correct.
What does that mean? What are you hearing through your office?
Well, Gateway is the largest national urban park in the country that includes Floyd Bennett Field as well as Canarsie Pier and Frank Charles Park over in the Howard Beach area. These are areas that are utilized regularly for recreation, for fishing, for family events, on a year-round basis in many instances. And of course now, because of the shutdown, they are unstaffed and as a result not really capable of utilization from the community. That's unfortunate. We increasingly are concerned with the fact that tax returns will be delayed as it relates to the tax refunds that millions of Americans rely upon in order to help them get through the year. We know, of course, as well that TSA workers, in some instances, because they are not being paid, are not showing up to work, and that's creating situations at JFK and LaGuardia Airport that are problematic for travelers, and it's problematic, of course, for all of these hardworking federal employees.
Right. So that's my understanding is that this week is the first missed paycheck for a lot of them, right? That the shutdown happened right around Christmas, and that happened to be around a payday. 2 weeks have now gone by. Now it's going to really start to bite. It's going to really start to hurt. What would be your advice to federal workers who are wondering what they should do just on a household level?
Well, it's very complicated, and unfortunately, we're not sort of in a situation where we can, without assistance from Republicans, provide the assurances that they will eventually get paid. I can say that in the context of every government shutdown that has unfortunately taken place in the last 25 years, those federal workers, whether they were either furloughed and not at work or forced to work without pay, were all compensated, and we expect that is going to happen this time around.
When the discussion comes to what we're hearing from the president, and he says the Democrats won't negotiate, the Democrats won't give me even a smaller wall or some metal slats or beaded curtain, you hear this kind of sort of sardonic take on it, but what is the position of the Democratic leadership of the House?
Well, I think here's the issue. You have the unreasonableness of the request related to the $5+ billion for a medieval border wall, and then you have the unreasonableness of the approach, which is to actually shut down government, hold 800,000 federal workers and the American people hostage in order to try to extract something that no expert believes will reasonably improve border security. So our position has been that we're willing to provide enhanced funding for security on the border, for things like fencing enhancements that the experts have said could be helpful, for technology improvements, for cell phones, for communications technology, for satellites, for drones, for the things that would improve the situation along the border. And we have, in fact, done so in the past and are willing to do so moving forward. But we will not waste taxpayer dollars on a border wall that Trump first said that Mexico would pay for, has been unable to convince Mexico to pay for it, and then during the last 2 years, you've had Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency, no border wall. How is it reasonable to conclude that Democrats in the majority will now give him something that his fellow colleagues in the Republican Party were unable to do?
When you were in the minority and Republicans were in charge of the House, why didn't they give him funding? Why didn't they approve funding for a wall?
Yeah, it's unclear, but I think part of it was that they largely were of the view that the effectiveness of the actual wall was in question, and that many of their members, some of whom were in tough districts, some of whom lost, some of whom won re-election, like Will Hurd, who's still back in the House of Representatives, were unwilling to do it, and certainly no Democrats were willing to support it. So I don't think they could have gotten to the vote total necessary in a meaningful way in the past.
My analysis would be that the most likely outcome is that the president gets to the point where he can say he's had the longest shutdown on record. He'll have the address tomorrow. Will politically be in a spot no different at the end of the week than we are now, except he'll be able to say this is the longest shutdown in history, at which point he'll in some way claim victory, and then it'll all be over. Is that something you think is likely or possible to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict because this president is so erratic, and this is, again, part of the chaos, crisis, and confusion that we've seen consistently from the Trump administration. But what is clear is that he's looking for an off-ramp, for a presidential lifeline, for a way out of this crisis, because it's clear that he's getting the blame for it appropriately. He's the one that said to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all of America that I will shut down the government, I'll be proud to shut down the government, and I'm going to own it. And that's why he's being blamed for it right now.
Does that, do you think, inoculate Democrats, your conference, against what we've seen in the past, right? The longest prior shutdown in the 1990s under Bill Clinton really kind of worked against the Republicans who controlled Congress at the time and who sort of triggered it. Are you all polling this? Are you aware of what the country thinks about all of this? And are you aware that, or are you worried that what the country thinks could change?
Well, we're not polling it, but in terms of the public opinion surveys that I have seen, the majority of Americans who have weighed in with respect to casting blame to one side or the other have clearly indicated they blame this shutdown on Donald Trump. Now, I do think that we need to continue to be responsible and take steps to reopen the government. Last week, we passed the appropriations bills together as one package, sent them over to the Senate. Mitch McConnell refuses to act because he continues to behave like a wholly owned subsidiary of the Trump administration as opposed to a separate and co-equal branch of government. That's unfortunate. This week, what we're going to do as soon as we get back to Washington tomorrow is to pass individual appropriations bills with respect to each of the different departments that have been shut down. We're going to begin by passing an appropriations bill to reopen the Treasury Department and the IRS so that everyday Americans can get their tax refunds that they rely upon. And we'll send those bills over to the Senate, and hopefully they will act.
Okay. And that's refunds and also, I imagine, the earned income tax credit, right? I mean, you've got to get that in order to... Okay, we'll see how all of that works. We will wish you the best of luck. We'll be watching. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, thank you.